Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. I need to get used to this. I keep getting caught off guard, but nevertheless, sir, welcome back to the Iftar Drive and welcome to Palestine Ramadan Radio. Palestine Ramadan Radio is done in conjunction and with the assistance of the Palestine Solidarity. Um, the PSA. And of course, inshallah, today we'll be speaking to Yumna Patel. She's a news director or the Palestine news director at Mondoweiss, and she joins us now from Beitul Laham or Bethlehem in Palestine. Assalamu alaikum, Yumna, and welcome to Salam Media.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Just a bit of background, Mondoweiss. Is this a publication that's based in Palestine, based in America? And why does it have Palestine-specific content?
So Mondoweiss is actually a US-based publication. This year we actually just celebrated our 16th anniversary. It started off as a blog by our founder, Phil Weiss, who's actually a Jewish American, but holds anti-Zionist principles. So that was how the platform was. So we cover Israel, Palestine, and also US politics, as it relates to the region, but very much from an anti-Zionist framework.
Fantastic. And how did you get involved as a South African?
So I had moved to Palestine after university. I had done a little time in Jordan, just learning Arabic. So then I came to Palestine. I was working as a journalist for a local Palestinian news agency. And then I started freelancing. And one of those organizations I was freelancing with was Mondoweiss. And then I came onto the team full-time a few years ago.
MashaAllah. And now you're the Palestine News Director. Fantastic. And we're so thrilled to be talking to you, Yumna, because this weekend, in fact, since Ramadan began, but we've seen, in the last few days and in the last week or so, quite an intensification of the aggression by Israeli forces against Palestinian worshippers going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And, every single day we have Palestine Ramadan Radio and we speak to different people, within the occupied territories and in Palestine and as well as Al-Quds. But I'm really interested to get your take on the reasons for all this violence. You just wrote an article that says that Israel has been beating Palestinian worshippers to make way for Jewish settlers. Could you perhaps tell us more about that? Why? Jewish settlers?
Sure. So, as I'm sure you've probably gathered from some of your conversations, and unfortunately, Ramadan often witnesses lots of violence against Palestinians by Israeli forces, particularly in Jerusalem. So this is nothing new. We saw this last year, and this violence at Al-Aqsa and at the Damascus Gate was actually sort of the spark that set off these massive protests in May 2021, and then eventually a deadly Israeli offensive on Gaza. So this is nothing new. What's interesting about this year, and this is not the first time that Ramadan coincides with Jewish holidays, but actually this year Ramadan has coincided with the Jewish holiday of Passover as well as the Christian holiday of Easter. So it's a very interesting time. And so, year round, just to give a little bit of background, so as not to, I think it's important for people to distinguish that this is not a religious conflict, it is a political conflict. So, year round, Israeli forces escort Israeli Jewish settlers onto the compound, to tour the compound, because as you may know, in the Jewish faith, it's believed that the site of Al-Haram al-Sharif, or as they call it, the Temple Mount, is the site of the ancient Jewish temple, which is the holiest site in the religion. And so it's frequently the site of Israeli raids where Israeli police will escort Israeli settlers. And of course, these raids and these tours for Jewish settlers are very provocative, of course, for Palestinians, due to the fact that year-round Palestinians are attacked. Their public spaces are very limited by Israel's security forces. So these sort of settler raids are seen as another just infringement on Palestinian rights to space in the city. And so what's happening this year is things have already been tense. Israel was already cracking down on Palestinians from the start of Ramadan at the Damascus Gate area and inside Jerusalem. And now this kind of just like set things off even more. The reason we framed it in the article as that Israel beats Palestinian worshippers in order to make way for Jewish settlers, so that's actually what did happen yesterday. So Israeli police forces stormed the compound. They were seen shooting Palestinian worshippers with batons. They fired tear gas, etc. There were also videos. There were also videos of Israeli police actually forcing Palestinian worshippers, mostly women, into the prayer hall and locking the door.
Locking the door, yes.
So if you saw probably the videos of people like screaming and banging on the windows, and so people were essentially attacked, thrown out of the compound or locked inside prayer halls in order to facilitate these groups of Jewish settlers so that they could have a nice, peaceful tour of the compound.
So essentially, it was just to allow people, Jewish people, to come around and have a tour. But my thing is, when we look at the situation and we see the violence and how the violence has escalated to the extent where old people, to the extent where women are beaten up, and to the extent where there's just no sense of humanity. When you were covering that, I mean, were you able to confront some of the perpetrators? Because I saw a video. Journalists being accosted. I saw journalists being beaten up. I saw one guy with a camera being beaten up by Israeli forces. Is there some sort of second part of the question? Is there also some sort of a move to not get the word out, move to not allow international media to report on what's actually happening on the ground?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Israeli attacks on journalists, primarily Palestinian journalists, is again sort of a tried and true tactic of the occupation, and it's a very easy, fast way to essentially stop or stifle the message from getting out, right? So that's why you'll see videos of mostly Palestinian journalists actually being attacked inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And you see this across occupied Palestine. At protests in the West Bank, journalists are frequently shot and injured. I just checked the recent numbers. According to the Journalist Support Committee, which is based in Beirut, 16 Palestinian journalists are actually currently in Israeli prison, and some of them are actually under administrative detention, which is a policy that Israel uses to imprison Palestinians without actually charging them or trying them with any crime. And so they're just sort of languishing in prison for no reason. And so these attacks on journalists, there's a steady track record in Israeli history of sort of suppressing and attacking Palestinian journalists. So what we've seen with these videos coming out of Al-Aqsa is not really anything new. I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely. Last year we saw, you talked about the escalation of violence, and we saw the eventual, attack on Gaza. I know this is a different year, and these are different reasons and different circumstances, but from your reading of the situation, the tension and the clashes, and the fact that it's Ramadan, and the fact that the Palestinians are not going to back down. They are as vociferous and as brave in defending Al-Aqsa. Do you see something? Do you think it might even just become all out, like war, like we saw last year?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to predict. I mean, I've had conversations like this with some colleagues and just some Palestinian friends. I wish that I could honestly give you an answer. I don't have one. I spoke to my colleague who was in Gaza to try to get a sense from him, and I asked him essentially the same question. He said, a lot of people, are going out and protesting against the violations at Al-Aqsa. But in terms of, another full-out war, it's unclear if even, the Palestinian political factions per se in Gaza have the capacity after last year, after the infrastructure was so heavily destroyed, if there is even a real capacity for engaging in any sort of fighting with Israel at this point. Last year when this was happening, we saw very sort of clear ultimatums from Palestinian political factions, specifically Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, saying, if Israel does not retreat from the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and from the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah by X time on X day, then there will be an escalation, and they followed through with that.
Okay.
We haven't really seen those sort of statements come out yet. We've seen statements condemning, obviously, what's happening, Palestinians holding Israel, of course, responsible, but we haven't seen sort of those levels, you could say, of threats to action.
Okay. Final question, Yumna. The narrative that we currently seeing right now, obviously the Israeli forces are beating up on defenseless women, old men. We've seen old men being pushed outside the masjid by the Damascus gate that you talked about. The merciless, absolute bullying. Now, the narrative that is created internationally about the treatment of Palestinians by the Israelis, do you think this is helping the Israelis in terms of their image, their international image, or is it damaging their international image?
This is a conversation that we come back to a lot, right? People might say that, especially after last year, during the offensive last year, more than at least 66 Palestinian children were killed in Gaza. Many Palestinians in the West Bank were gunned down, during protests. Most of them were unarmed. So, and you would think that, okay, that has damaged, Israel's public image, I guess, in the eyes of the world. I would say that after last year, we saw sort of these unprecedented levels of global solidarity just from ordinary world citizens, going out to the streets and standing in solidarity with Palestine. So I think to answer your question, if you split it up into two parts, like global citizenry and then global leadership, you have two different answers. So has this affected Israel's public image or standing in the world amongst the global citizenry? I would say yes. And I say more and more people are sort of coming around and standing in solidarity with Palestinians and calling for an end, to Israel's occupation, and now what many human rights groups have actually called an apartheid system. And then you also have global leaders who sort of just continue to give platitudes when it comes to the situation, calling for calm and peace, but never actually holding Israel accountable for its human rights violations.
I did say that was my last question, but the hashtag Brave Palestine, have you heard about it? The bravery? What do you think of that? Do you think it's important? Do you think people should jump on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if anything at the end of the day calls attention to what's happening, then it's good. If it's going to garner more attention surrounding many of the young people who are sort of, defending themselves at the Al-Aqsa compound, then yeah, sure, I think it's great.
Yumna Patel, a great pleasure speaking to you. Keep up the good work, and inshallah, we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, and Ramadan Mubarak to everybody.
Ramadan Kareem to you as well. Yumna Patel, she is the director of Palestine News at Mondoweiss, and she's talking to us there from Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ. And of course, she's part of our Palestine Ramadan Radio. Of course, inshallah, every single day we have this discussion on Palestine Ramadan Radio, and of course, brought to you by the PSA. And of course, inshallah, we will continue with the program. And when we do come back, we come back with Maulana Yunus Kawanga with today's Spiritual Hour. Stay tuned.